So the other day I woke up kind of on the wrong side of the bed, so to speak. That kind of in a bad mood sort of way. It doesn't happen to me very often. I usually wake up startled, right? But I woke up and I was kind of grouchy. It's not normally normal for me to be in a bad mood, but I noticed one little small thing that kind of went wrong within a couple of minutes of getting up, and then I noticed another, and then I started keeping track, and then I noticed related things that bothered me, and then unrelated things that bothered me, and on and on and on it went. It took me a while to kind of dig out of that. Why is it so much easier for some people, let's be honest, maybe for most people, to go negative? Well, here's a little bit of insight about this dynamic. And I'm going to end with 3 disciplines that you can practice to get you out of and stay out of the ditch of negative thinking. And you can share this with someone that you might know. You may want to share it anonymously. So this phenomenon has been studied extensively for decades, and it's come to be referred to as a negativity bias. And there are several reasons why negative thoughts, and in individuals as well as eventually in groups, tend to grow more easily. They tend to feel stronger, more dominant, and more durable than do positive thoughts. So first, our survival brain. We have a region in our brain that I like to call our survival brain. It's actually a system in our brain. And we're really set up to perceive everything internal to us and external to us and put it either in a threat bucket or a reward bucket. And we prioritize threats over rewards because misinterpreting a threat is far more costly than misinterpreting a reward. So our threat systems are much more robust and much faster, although not as accurate as our reward systems. Also, our amygdala, which is partly responsible for sending the alarm, is at minimum twice as fast, maybe even more fast than that, at signaling danger than at signaling reward. And it's very efficient from an energy consumption perspective. Our reward processes are about 10 times more energy intensive and only half at best as fast as our threat processes. Our neural pathways are stronger and form more quickly for threatening or potentially threatening negative events than for positive events, and they tend to last longer. Positive thought processes require intentional, active effort to maintain. Gratitude, hope, optimism need deliberate practice because they're not a requirement for moment-by-moment survival. The garden of optimism and agency therein requires constant attention, and if we leave it unattended for very long, the blackberry bushes of negativity are going to flourish. So, okay, first, we've got a survival brain. Another reason why it's so easy to steer into the ditch of negativity is the second reason is our stories, the stories that we tell ourselves. So we live in a very connected world, and we're exposed to threats more and more all the time, whether the threats are imagined or not. Those exposures to threats happen hundreds of times a day. And we live in the middle of what I like to call a fear industrial complex. The story that we tell ourselves, or a version of the stories we tell ourselves about life, about feeling stressed and about feeling afraid, are part of the reason why we can so easily go into the deep, dark tunnels of threat and of negativity. If we feel afraid, we begin to tell ourselves that there must be something to be afraid of. And that connectivity, which is always saying boo to us and look out and careful, you're scared, look out, and the threat put before us all the time. If we feel afraid or versions of fear like anxiety or stress, then there must be something to be afraid of is where we start to go. The threat is real, I start to think, and I can't do anything about it. And that threat will hurt or damage or kill me or make me late. If I feel afraid or stressed, it's got to be real. And we're all connected digitally, and the most common stories that we hear and that fly across our digital connected networks and we see and we hear all the time are threat-based stories. They're the ones that capture our attention. And we, to some degree, a little or a lot, believe those stories. So the third reason why we can easily steer into the ditch of negativity bias is that we have people who are around us that are negative. They profoundly shape our mental models and our biases. And the people around us, a great big force on whether or not we tend to stay optimistic or pessimistic, do so. They shape us by telling us threat-based stories that are passed along from one social group to another social group. And they do that, we pass those on much more readily than reward-based stories. The second way they do that is that negative messages that are in groups garner more attention than do positive ones. The third way they do that, sadly, negative people are often seen in groups as more intelligent than optimistic or positive people, even though all reliable assessments of intelligence actually indicate the opposite, that higher IQs tend to exist in positive people. And the fourth way they do this is that we unconsciously adopt the habits of the people who we are around the most. Another way we do this is that negative groups tend toward catastrophic explanations, or here's a fancy word, catastrophizing, while positive groups tend toward hopeful interpretations like it's tough, but it's temporary. Negative group stories will therefore last a lot longer than positive group stories. The sixth way that we are shaped by the people we hang out with is that groups reinforce group membership or belonging or affiliation through constant feedback loops. If X happens, then it means Y. Negative groups have feedback loops that sound like, it's always been this way, it's never going to work, you can't make any difference. They won't listen. Positive groups have feedback loops that sound like, yeah, that's tough, but if we keep at it and we keep working hard, even though that was a failure, it won't remain a failure. But let's try it again. They're the ones who say, we failed, we haven't succeeded yet. That's not what you expected, a positive group would say, but you've got this, let's keep going. Another way that groups influence us is that negative groups have a lowest common denominator effect. That's a dynamic that results in a spiraling downward of effort and energy. That is, we tend to all go to the lowest common denominator in that group. Positive groups have a highest common denominator dynamic, which requires more deliberate work. So we look through the group, and whoever is the best at this or the best at that, we want to be like them. So those are three reasons so far as to why it's easy to steer into the ditch. Here's a fourth reason why some people have a negativity bias. The disciplines that they adopt and that they try over and over, they know that the most resilient and robust people have different disciplines and different habits than fragile and burnt out and negative people. We've written a lot about this in a couple of my books. One of them is the 1201 study, which you can get on Amazon, or the 1201 Project, it's titled, and the 5 Disciplines of High-Performing Teams. If you want to get those books, you can learn more about this. There's much more coming soon also, by the way, because I'm working on a book right now called Built for the Storm. So keep an eye out for that, and we're going to unpack some more of that stuff. So disciplines are different from habits in that we know that the disciplines of people who go into the ditch are different than the disciplines who go into, who stay positive. So disciplines are different in that disciplines take willpower to start and habits do not. But the good news is, once started, the practice of a discipline doesn't take much, if any, willpower to continue, but it takes willpower to start. Much like activation energy, and we have a couple of videos here that explain that to us. So here's the good stuff. Here's the stuff that you can work on to make sure that you don't end up in the negativity bias ditch. We've learned that there are many disciplines optimistic people have that are different from those of pessimists. But I want to focus specifically on the deliberate practice of what Martin Seligman calls the 3 pillars of resilience. These are 3 explanatory tools that tend to explain why some people bounce back from setbacks or spiral into negative and eventually depressive kind of thinking. Here they are. The first one he calls personalization. This refers to the tendency of a person with negative bias to blame themselves entirely for anything that is painful or difficult. It's all my fault. I should have this, I should have that, I shouldn't have this, I shouldn't have that. But a resilient person who does not steer into the ditch of negativity owns their part while understanding that factors outside of their control contributed to the difficulty as well. Okay, they say, I missed that, or I didn't do this or that thing. And then there are other things and other factors that even if I had not missed it, I had no control over. And they move from it's all my fault to some of it, maybe even a great deal of it, was my fault. But some of it was due to circumstances outside of my control. So the action item you and I can take there is that we deliberately write or say out loud, that's my part, I own that. But that was not my part. This was within my control, this was not within my control. So the second of the three is what Seligman calls permanence. This is the belief that negative events will last forever and they will affect every area of life. Well, resilient, optimistic people understand that most negative events are temporary and eventually improve. The discipline is to move from kind of an Eeyore mindset, oh, forever, we're all gonna die, it'll never change, to, well, this probably won't last forever. This will last a while, but not forever. You and I can deliberately identify or imagine when this setback will end. And the more we do that, the more powerful that is. And the third idea from Seligman is what he calls pervasiveness. This refers to the extent to which a negative event is seen as impacting other areas of one's life. A resilient or optimistic person who has this bias believes that the setback in one area of life does not mean difficulty or failure or setback in another area of my life. The action you and I can take is to deliberately look at, talk about, write about arenas in your life or work that are untouched by this setback, no matter how deep and difficult that setback was. Don't just think about them, they'll write them down. Say them out loud to another person. So here's a pro tip. As you practice those three areas that I just went through, you'll eventually be able to identify ways that the setback has actually improved your life. Now there's something a negative Ned or Nancy will never be able to do. So there you go. Be super careful. Don't let your negative thought processes drag you into the ditch because it's extremely difficult to get out. All right, here's to you.